Welcome to the Walrus Talks Gender-Based Violence, presented by the Canadian Women's Foundation. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I will be your host this evening. We're thrilled to be here in person in Toronto at the Isabel Theatre, as well as streaming live online at the walrus.ca. So a big hello and welcome to the over 1,200 households who registered for our live stream. Can we give them a round of applause? Now, we encourage you to share tonight's conversation on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus. Our hashtag is #WalrusTalks. Hashtag is also a great way for us to connect the IRL, in real life audience, with our audience at home. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And we're really honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling. We encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, whether you're here with us in Toronto or online, somewhere else across the country or around the world. As we get started, I'd like to share a content warning. Tonight's talks will explore many aspects and areas of gender-based violence, and it may include content that is upsetting. It's an upsetting topic. So if you need to get up and take a break from this theater, feel free to do so, and then you can come back in. If you're online, if you need to walk away or put down the laptop, we encourage you to do so. Also, help is available. Crisis support lines and emotional support workers are available to you. Contact information for both will be emailed to everyone following tonight's event, no matter where you're watching from. This year, the Walrus turns 20, and we are celebrating 20 years of Canada's conversation, taking a look at who we are now. You can find our stories online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to The Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts or be a part of public events like this one, The Walrus Talks. And this work is made possible by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you for being a part of this, and again to the Canadian Women's Foundation for working with us on this event. You may have noticed a news story a few weeks ago about a family of 5 in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, killed due to intimate partner violence. A family of 5. When I heard this news, I paused. I sat with it, because it's a powerful reminder of why we're here tonight and what we're talking about. And also that there are so many stories that don't make the news or even get reported. We know from a 2021 Statistics Canada report that more than 4 in 10 women experience some form of intimate partner violence. More than 4 in 10. These statistics become even more harrowing when you start to drill down. Indigenous women and girls are 12 times more likely to be murdered or missing than any other women in Canada, and 16 times more likely in comparison to white women like myself. This has to change. To that end, I want to take a moment to share something that we can all do. This is the Canadian Women's Foundation Signal for Help. I'll do it again. This hand signal, by trapping your thumb in your palm, is a way to tell someone if you are in danger and you need help. Hopefully you won't need to use it, but please do if you need help. We also have a responsibility to take action if we see it. If you see this, reach out to the person safely. Be supportive, acknowledge their experience, listen to them, and let them tell you what they need. Then refer them to services and offer resources as needed. And you may see the signal in different places. It could be from someone you know and love. It could be on a Zoom meeting or from a stranger at an airport. If someone is in imminent danger, call 911 or your local emergency services. Tonight, you'll hear all about how we need to shift our culture from one of stigma and often silence around this issue of gender-based violence to one of survivor support. Learning this hand signal and what to do if you see it is an important first step. Tonight, we have 7 speakers who have 7 minutes each, and they will offer 7 different perspectives on this topic. We'll be hearing from Paulette Sr., President and Chief Executive Officer at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Pamela Cross, Advocacy Director, Luke's Place. Jake Stika, Executive Director, Next Gen Men. Anuradha Dugal, Vice President, Community Initiatives, Canadian Women's Foundation. Faye Slift and Fluffy Soufflé, the best names. Storytellers and Stars with the fabulous show with Faye and Fluffy. Shree Paradkar, Columnist and Internal Ombud, Toronto Star. And Angela Sterritt, national best-selling author of Unbroken. A round of applause as we welcome these speakers to the stage.
Imagine working closely with someone every day, doing projects together, sitting side by side at your desks. Imagine starting out as co-workers and colleagues and over the years eventually becoming friends. Imagine her coming to work one morning with a saddened, tired face. Imagine her telling you that her partner hit her last night and she was so scared. She cried all night, but she came to work in a complete daze. What would you do in this situation? My name is Paulette Sr. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Thank you for joining us at this event. So, if you're not sure about how you would respond in scenarios such as this, if you're nervous that you might say or do the wrong thing, you're not alone. Many of us really aren't sure how to respond when we get the sense that a friend or coworker or colleague or family member is in an abusive situation. We're not well equipped to respond to gender-based violence, whether it's intimate partner abuse, sexual assault and harassment, or domestic violence. It's not something that we openly talk about. So no wonder we hold conflicting views about it. A Canada-wide poll by the Canadian Women's Foundation found that 90% of people believe everyone has a responsibility to stop gender-based violence. But at the same time, 23% of people say intimate partner violence is none of my business if it doesn't directly involve me. So there is a gap. There's a gap between our anti-violence values and our competence and confidence to play an anti-violence role in real life. In recent years, we've seen increased public awareness and accountability about abuse of women, girls, and gender-diverse people, and it's quite a common experience. But increased awareness might obscure the reality that many still view gender-based violence as an ugly, unmentionable topic that should actually stay behind closed doors. And perhaps we're prone to assume abuse is a rare occurrence between dysfunctional people in dysfunctional circumstances, unlikely to happen to people we know and love. Maybe we go even further. Maybe we're prone to judge those who face abuse, presuming they made the wrong choices to be in that particular position. But our typical mental biases play out in our perceptions of abuse as much as anywhere else in life. Normalcy bias, for example, means that we don't imagine abuse will affect us directly, even as it affects others. Optimism bias means we overestimate favorable outcomes even in unsafe and dangerous situations. The valence effect causes us to think good things are more likely to happen to us and the people we love rather than bad things. The ostrich effect, burying your head in the sand, means we tend to avoid unpleasant information altogether. Yet facts confront our biases head-on. 44% of all women in Canada experience psychological, sexual, or physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetimes. 2/3 of people know a woman who has experienced physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. A woman or girl is killed by violence every 48 hours. Remember, estimates of gender-based violence rates based on healthcare police reports underestimate its prevalence. Most of this abuse goes completely unreported. The truth, though, is that for women, girls, and gender-diverse people, especially those vulnerable to racism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, isolation, and poverty, gender-based violence is not an exceptional experience. It happens all the time. And even in our psychological or cultural denial, I believe deep down we know this to be true. Because there's an antithetical sense in which we understand the risk to women, girls, and gender-diverse people, we're told to watch our backs, cover our drinks, not accept rides, not party too hard, be out too late, or dress too tight. We're expected to be aware of our environment, know the right streets to stroll, travel in packs, grip our keys, wear sensible shoes, swipe carefully, and don't forget to notice the red flags. We're told we need to defend ourselves, or we're not smart. We live in deep, deep contradictions. So in the grip of under-acknowledged high risk of gendered abuse, even higher for those of us who are marginalized, we're expected to be warriors for our own safety, be victimized people. But victimized people cannot expect to get safer all on their own. Take it from me. I know what it's like to be trapped in an abusive home because I feared for my life and that of my child. I know what it's like to be at greater risk because I told him I was going to leave. That's why we cannot wait. We have to be proactive about building safety for abuse survivors. And we all have a part to play in transforming our culture, as you heard before, of stigma and silence about abuse to a culture of safety and support for those at risk. The Canadian Women's Foundation launched a signal for help when the COVID pandemic meant those being abused were trapped at home with their abusers. And as you heard before, it means that you need to check in with someone safely because they need help. But within months, the signal for help spread across social media and the news like wildfire, and women and girls across the globe used it to get help in dangerous situations. But the signal is only as good as its response. And just like we train people to do CPR, we knew we could train people to recognize signs of abuse and support their family and friends at risk so that they know they're not alone. Over 50,000 people actually signed up to be Signal for Help responders and counting. What can you do if you think your friend, family, or coworker is going through abuse? Be non-judgmental. Let them know you'll support them no matter what. Ask them what they need from you and follow their lead. Second, know that local services, crisis lines, and employee assistance programs, you cannot refer them to for more specialized help from experts. Third, sign up at signalresponder.ca to get the tools, tips, and training to learn how to better support abuse survivors in your life. So imagine along with me what would happen if you did this and you knew how to support that colleague when they turned to you for much needed support. Imagine if everyone in this room and in Canada and across the world made it their business to learn these skills. And finally, imagine with me the impact we could make and the stories we could change. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to ask you to imagine as well. I'm going to ask you to imagine a world in which that family wasn't killed in Sault Ste. Marie 2 weeks ago. A world in which 4 women in Ontario in the past week were not killed by men who said they loved them. I want you to imagine the transformative change we have to make to create that world. Good evening. My name's Pamela Cross, and I'm the Advocacy Director with Luke's Place. The term coercive control has entered the legal discourse relating to intimate partner violence, or IPV, as I'll call it, in Canada over the past few years. Coercive control is a pattern of behaviors, including psychological, social, and financial abuse, that gives one partner power and control over the other. It often doesn't include any physical violence at all. Sometimes compared to gaslighting, it's a particularly insidious kind of abuse. It leaves the victim feeling as though she's the hostage of her partner. She steadily loses her autonomy, her entire sense of self, in an atmosphere of constant fear and terror. The term is now included in the definition of family violence that appears in family law legislation across much of the country, and it's slowly beginning to have a positive impact on how judges make decisions about parenting arrangements in families where there has been IPV. Now there's a push to create a new criminal offense of coercive control, as has been done in some other countries. I don't think this is the right direction to go. This is not transformational. That's certainly not what I would have said 30 years ago when I began representing women who had been victimized by gender-based violence. Then I was all for a criminal response. I wanted to see my clients' partners charged and jailed. I thought that would perhaps send a message to the abuser that he should change his behavior. But even if it didn't do that, putting him behind bars would, I thought, give her the space to find a safer life, validate for her that what had been done to her was wrong. However, over time, I came to realize that criminalizing IPV did none of these things. And as a result, I no longer think of the criminal law as a particularly helpful response. Applying it to IPV-related behaviors is like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't fit for either the victim or the person who's caused the harm. Criminal laws work reasonably well for those who have developed them over the past few hundred years. Straight, white, cis men with money and property, and those with other kinds of privilege. They don't work so well for, and often cause more harm to, the rest of us, women, gender diverse folks, people who are differently abled, Indigenous people, people of color, and poor people, to name just a few. Why would we expect anything different when Canadian criminal law is rooted in the misogyny, racism, classism, and colonialism of English common law? We have only to look at mandatory charging policies in effect across Canada since the mid-1980s for evidence of how a policy intended to protect victims of intimate partner violence has actually been used to further harm those victims. This policy requires police to lay charges where there's any evidence a domestic assault has taken place, whether or not the victim wants that to happen. Good idea in theory, maybe, but it has backfired in its execution. Some women have good reason not to want to engage with the criminal system. Others don't want their partner to be criminalized. Mandatory charging removes the woman's control over her situation. And in fact, sometimes charging the abuser makes life more dangerous for the woman. Finally, women, especially those from marginalized communities, find themselves charged when they shouldn't be. This charge then follows them into family court, where it often has a negative impact on the parenting-related aspects of their case. When I think about criminalizing coercive control, and the government is looking at a bill to do just that this very day, I think of the negative consequences of mandatory charging. And that's why I say, no, let's not do that again. Consider these few questions. Criminal law is single incident focused, but coercive control is the opposite. It's a pattern of incidents, often extending over a long period of time. How likely then is it that charges will be laid and prosecuted and judges will be able to make guilty findings beyond a reasonable doubt? The players in the criminal system, from police to judges, lack adequate education on intimate partner violence. Given this, will they be able to apply and interpret a criminal offense of coercive control properly? As with mandatory charging, abusers will manipulate the truth to convince the police that they, not their partner, are the victim. Does this mean that women will be inappropriately charged and face the consequences and challenges of that? What if a woman does not report coercive control to the police? About 70% of women don't report other kinds of abuse. Is that going to be used by her partner in family court to discredit her claims of violence? Let me leave you with this thought. We need to urge the government to abandon its thoughts about creating a criminal offense of coercive control. Instead, as the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission recommends, let's embark on a society-wide discussion about finding different responses to intimate partner violence. Responses that will hear and empower survivors rather than silencing and disempowering them. Responses that will allow those who have caused harm to acknowledge what they have done, take responsibility for it, make reparation and heal. Responses that will build safe communities for all of us. That's how we move from responding to gender-based violence to building a world free from that violence. Thank you.
It's an honor to be doing a Walrus talk, which is why I grew my best walrus mustache. Good evening. My name is Jake Stika. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director and co-founder of Next Gen Men. We're a nonprofit organization focused on building better men through youth and peer engagement, education, and empowerment. With a background like that, you're probably expecting me to spend the next 7 minutes talking about how men can be allies in the fight against gender-based violence. Not quite. Absolutely, the engagement of men and boys is crucial to ending violence and advancing equity for girls, women, and gender-diverse peoples. But being an ally doesn't capture the role we need to play to move forward. To help illustrate our approach, let me share a quote from renowned Black feminist Bell Hooks in her book, The Will to Change, when she wrote, "The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence toward women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem." I love this quote. What I take from it is that men are not male allies. Men are not adjacent to the issue. Men are in the thick of it. Men have experienced gender-based violence their whole lives. Every inadequate performance of masculinity resulting in a paper cut of patriarchy in the form of man up. Boys don't cry. That's so gay. You throw like a girl. Attacks on our sense of self, our sense of safety, our sense of belonging and worth as we are. This leads to statistics that show men are not only the primary perpetrators of violence, but aside from gender-based violence, as defined across genders, we are more likely to be victims of all other forms of violence at the hands of other men. At this point, I think we can say a couple of things with certainty. Everyone in this room wants to end gender-based violence. And anyone engaging in violence is likely not fine and has not been fine for a while. As I see it, to end gender-based violence, we need to start where it begins. Our approach is to meet boys and men where they live, learn, work, and play, and turn those into more positive spaces for them. What does that look like? It looks like starting a Discord server for teenage boys during the height of the pandemic to stay connected that not only hosts Minecraft missions and Dungeons and Dragons dynasties, but creates space for open and honest reflections on what it means to mature from a boy into a man in 2023. One youth went so far as to say it is the safest space for boys on the internet. Safe, boys, internet. Those are 3 words rarely heard in one sentence. It also looks like taking some of these extremely online boys on hikes in the Rockies or canoe trips in the Kawartha Lakes. Perhaps bear country and portages are not as safe as the Discord server, but imagine becoming a man through challenge by choice and the spirit of collaboration, courage, and connection with a whole group of other boys. This work also looks like running a book, that is BOOK, Beyond Our Own Knowledge, club, for over 650 men in male-dominant industries over the past 3 years, reading works from authors outside the dominant narratives of white, straight, cisgender males in the business world. It also looks like meeting men where they're at, literally in the refineries of Alberta and the mining sites of BC, translating lofty DEI goals of anti-oppression and intersectionality from office towers into relatable goals in the field like safety and belonging, answering what's in it for me when presented with apathy or agitation. This work looks like creating decks of cards to spark conversation about changing the meaning of masculinity for when we're too scared or nervous to start from scratch. Just shuffle the deck and a transformative talk awaits you. I could keep going, but what I hope you walk away with is that we do not need more programs for problems that treat boys and men solely as perpetrators. There exists a male-positive, pro-feminist possibility in engaging boys and men for their own liberation from patriarchy. Phil Christman wrote in a piece titled, "What is it like to be a man?" To put it simply, every social encounter between men is potentially a fistfight. You learn this in elementary school and never forget it. If we're serious about the prevention of gender-based violence, I hope we can be serious in preventing the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of boys, and help men heal from the paper cuts of patriarchy they've sustained. The fact that we are experiencing changes in how we see, act, and think about masculinity from generation to generation gives me hope that we are building a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. Thank you.
To remember to lower that. Unprecedented wildfires, followed by devastating floods in eastern Canada. Powerfully destructive fires across the country, rapidly melting permafrost in the north with a warming rate at least twice the rest of the globe. I'm Anuradha Dugal at the Canadian Women's Foundation. What's happening in 2023 is that we're realizing we're living in the era of polycrisis. Disasters overlap and mount like waves and sweep us in their tides. Perhaps we were naive before about the way this happens until the early eerie days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Restrictions on travel, shutdowns, stay-at-home orders, and curfews felt downright apocalyptic in 2020. We doom-scrolled. We hung on the words of health officials we didn't even know the names of before. We checked our feeds hourly for the latest infection and death rates. Some of us feared the worst. In past disasters, those of us in women's and community services had seen abuse rates increase and inequalities simultaneously deepen for women and gender diverse people, especially the most marginalized, women with disabilities, Indigenous, Black, and racialized women, 2S LGBTQIA+ people, women in remote areas, just to name a few. The 2008 global economic crisis, the 2013 floods in Alberta, the 2016 Fort McMurray fires, the list is endless, and it rolls on and it gets longer every year. They led to higher rates of intimate partner abuse, sexual assault, and other forms of gender-based violence, although you didn't always hear about it in the news. Only 1 month into the COVID-19 pandemic, rates of violence against women and girls were called a global shadow pandemic by UN Women. The data came in from the US, from France, from Germany, from Japan, from Korea. In Canada, femicide rates bumped to reach today's stunning level. A woman or girl is killed by violence every 48 hours. Calls to police and crisis lines have surged, and intimate partner violence has increased in intensity and severity. And to add to the pressure, especially during the pandemic, those in precarious female-dominated service jobs, personal support workers, cashiers, cleaners, were in a double bind. These often racialized and newcomer women would bear the brunt of greater risk of abuse at home, on top of higher levels of illness and hardship at work. Even though the movement of the virus was unpredictable, its gendered impacts were not. Disaster strikes, gender-based violence spikes. But Canada's emergency plans don't disrupt the strike and spike pattern. They do nothing to prevent it. They simply do not account for the unique ways diverse women and gender diverse people experience crises. A review of 28 regional plans found that just 2 refer to gender. Just 5 mention women, and only 2 refer to domestic violence. At the municipal level, where much of our immediate response to disasters happens, a review of 24 emergency planning documents found no reference to women or gender at all. This omission, this gender gap in our emergency planning means that in times of crisis, those tasked with rolling out the emergency responses are neither attuned to nor trained to respond to the shared experience of more than half the population. And local charities reported during the pandemic, months into it, when the disproportionate gendered impacts became just about impossible to ignore, local officials pressed them for opportunities to consult. But the thick of the crisis is the exact worst time to launch stakeholder consultations. It puts already overstretched community-based services under inordinate pressure while they scramble to close the gaps due to inadequate pre-disaster planning. And as these shelters and services remained steadfastly open, stay-at-home orders failed to make this clear. Safety planning for gender-based violence was not a central part of the emergency response. Now, fast forward to today. Municipalities and government leaders are declaring intimate partner violence a pandemic, an epidemic, after the femicides and the fatal domestic violence, such as what happened in Sault Ste. Marie. Some are vowing to marshal funding to victim services. It's an important move. All the same, our historic slowness to close the gender gap in crisis management continues to cost lives and leads to untold trauma. It leads to some fundamental questions. Who exactly are our emergency plans for? Whose safety and livelihoods are we prepared and eager to protect? Who do we choose not to concern ourselves with when we plan for the unexpected? We have more than enough evidence to understand that crisis leads to gendered abuse and hardship. How is it that our crisis plans barely breathe a word of women, girls, and gender-diverse people? It's about time we answer these questions. In the male-dominated field of emergency management and planning, consultation and collaboration with everyday women and marginalized people are exceedingly rare. This needs to change. Our federal government prioritizes the consideration of gendered realities in financial support for emergency preparedness through its feminist international assistance policy. We need the same commitment for disaster and emergency response domestically. We need to invest in shock-proofing our communities against gender-based violence so that when shocks of fire, flood, conflict, and outbreak strike us, spikes in abuse and femicide don't happen. A nuanced understanding of how human beings in all our diversities live through crises and their aftermath is overdue. Equitable responses that don't leave anyone behind are the only way we'll be able to get through. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're going to start off with our chat with the words that we say at the beginning of every episode of The Fabulous Show with Faye and Fluffy. We're on a mission to be fabulous.
Bring joy, and most importantly,
Read the house down.
My name is Caleb Robertson. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a transgender masculine person. I am also Fluffy Soufflé, a non-binary drag performer whose pronouns are they, them. I am the gender diversity you've all been hearing about. I have then, of course, faced gender-based violence as a young girl, as a masculine-presenting woman, as a transgender person, and most unexpectedly, as a drag performer who just wanted to read some stories to kids. I have also had to recognize my own privilege as someone who now presents as a white man-ish, and my responsibility now to be aware of other people's safety and comfort. This week right now is Transgender Awareness Week, which ends on November 20th, which is internationally recognized as Transgender Day of Remembrance. Sadly, it began in 1999, and my community was given this day to specifically remember the lives of people who have lost their lives in the previous year due to anti-transgender violence. And so each year we read the names of the people who we have lost. And unfortunately, that doesn't include everybody, because we also have a lot of people in our community who may not be recognized, who don't get recognized in their deaths as who they lived in their life. And so we're taking that time this week to acknowledge all of those people of our community.
My name is JP Kane. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an educator with the TDSB, celebrating 27 years.
Ooh.
Currently, I am a kindergarten teacher. I am also drag performer Faye Slift. I began my performance career in 2007 at Buddies and Bad Times Theater. My first experience of being exposed to gender-based violence occurred in a place where all children should feel ultimately the safest. It occurred at home. I was a soft and gentle little boy. This very fact shook the foundations of my father's notion of masculinity. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse at the hands of 2 different priests and also an uncle. At the age of 10, I was watching a documentary. I believe it was called The Human Animal, hosted by Desmond Morris. They were talking about homosexuality. I turned to my dad and I just asked, what does it mean to be homosexual? He paused, and his response was, if you are one, tell me now, and I will put you out of your misery. It was in that moment that I knew I was truly alone in my family. But over the years, I have found unconditional love and support in found family.
We've been doing story times together for over 7 years now, and have been thrilled to be invited to so many institutions in Toronto, the ROM, the AGO, Harbourfront Centre, as well as many schools, public libraries, community centers, and lots of neighborhood community events. Our first goal was to read some stories with kids and have some laughs. We also really wanted to take inspiration and provide safe spaces and inclusive spaces for our communities and our allies to gather together and enjoy the art of drag as a family. Drag has been happening for families forever. The experience has been incredible. We get the honor of sending out a message of joy, of celebrating diversity, of being proud of your family and of yourself, and interacting with some of the most incredible human beings out there, kids. Our events are magical and empowering. On occasion, we would receive emails which were a little bit offensive to us. They were often threatening and sometimes littered with Bible quotes. Instagram gives you an opportunity to block certain words. So I had to sit there and think of every offensive, nasty thing that we could be called so that I could block it. Occasionally, I'd have to revisit that list as a new word would sneak through, or people would find creative ways to spell things so that they would also get through. Because we always wanted our Instagram to be a place where families can scroll together. So we do not have any tolerance for any kind of negativity and hatred. And occasionally we see that on other posts of a library might be excited to have us out there, and then we scroll through the comments, and it's disheartening.
There have been so many changes in the story times, particularly around the past 8 months. However, with the arrival of the pandemic and the unhinged conspiracy theories and the hate, we have noticed an uptick in threats, which have become increasingly violent in nature. In the past 8 months, we've been experiencing real-life protesters, transphobes, homophobes, and actual Nazis. There is definitely a correlation between the rise of the anti-science, anti-vax, and conspiracy theorists, spewing rhetoric and vile accusations of us being groomers and pedophiles. A huge, massive shout out to brave librarians. Who have championed our story times from the inception of Faye and Fluffy Storytime. When we go to events now, we are actually embraced with open arms. We are actually also given detailed maps and clandestine routes in order to avoid the harassment. Often there are police presence in those spaces, which totally go against a lot of what we believe in. Again, we're reading stories to children, encouraging them to be proud of who they are, encouraging them to be proud of their families. Sending a message to communities all over Ontario that these spaces are safe and inclusive ones.
Needless to say, these dehumanizing threats have had an impact on our mental health, raising our already present anxiety as we go into new spaces. Recently, just in the last couple months in Mississauga, we were there with CBC's The National, which you can check out that episode that they did about violence against drag story times. We had no idea there was going to be anything there other than a beautiful time. What they actually captured was an invasion of our space. It was a public space outdoors. As we started our story time, suddenly we were filled with predominantly men, and this beautiful space that was filled with children and families suddenly had massive signage with vile statements, drones recording us, men standing in front of families recording themselves, people yelling out Bible quotes again, and just trying to interrupt and disrupt what was a time, turning these families into activists who were just there to enjoy some stories and have a nice afternoon. One of the most offensive sights that we saw that day was these groups of people have appropriated orange shirts. And they are now wearing orange shirts with the hashtag Save Our Children, and a ill-written endorsement of military hero worship, which really just broke our hearts.
Yeah.
But we remained, and we did our story time, and we will never back down.
Yeah, so in a few weeks, we will begin filming our second series for our show. We are recent recipients of the Shaw Rocket Fund Kids' Choice Award, where children and families across the country voted, and we won, and we beat out Paw Patrol.
As much as we love what we are doing, as much as we have been embraced by kids and families across Canada and around the world, children are still being harassed in schools. Several of the kids in our circle are being harassed, bullied, and facing physical violence in their schools based on their gender presentations. Families are being verbally assaulted at our shows, and we refuse to crawl away and hide in any proverbial closet, because what belongs in closets?
Clothes, not people.
So we want children to see their communities reflected around them in what we do. They deserve to see that, and the literacy they consume. It is our duty to be there for those children and uplift their voices and celebrate who they are as they have embraced us so much. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Shree Paradkar, a columnist and internal Ombud at the Toronto Star. No, I didn't make that face at the Toronto Star. I made that face at what I'm about to say. And I wish I didn't have to share this, but let me begin with a series of things I found in my inbox when I just put in the word cunt. Shut the fuck up, you stupid race-baiting cunt. You disingenuous fake news whore. You're going to get brutally raped. Go live under Sharia like the slave you are. Drop dead. Kill yourself. I'm going to smash your head in. I'm going to get a rope. A few centuries ago, women were burnt at the stake. These women were called witches. Today, in our digital era, women are being harassed and even killed for expressing opinions. We, are called bitches, and as you just saw, far worse. While what I've offered here is a glimpse, just a few seconds long, into my inbox, this is a daily reality for women journalists, especially for Indigenous and journalists of color. To be clear, reader and viewer feedback is normal and welcome, but disagreement is not abuse. As a female, the abuse I get is often misogynistic. You can see it in a recent email I got after writing in support of the civilians in Gaza. Will it be satisfying to see Shree Paradkar driven around in the back of a dirty truck with her leg on backwards? As an immigrant woman of color, the racist harassment I face is deeply rooted in colonialism, anti-indigeneity, anti-blackness, and Islamophobia. In that same email, you dirty sand N-word, you were warned by me and a dozen of my friends. What did we tell you? We told you how easy it was to get a drunk S-word, a slur for Indigenous people, to shove one of you activist reporters into a wall. Abuse of journalists is not new, but where a pre-internet troll would have had to write something, put it in an envelope, write out the address, and post it. Today, all of those opportunities for cooling off are gone. What's new now is the frequency of attacks, their multiple access points to you, their viciousness, the threats of sexual assault, the bone-chilling violence they wish upon you, on your children, the threat of being doxxed, stalking, and murder. A landmark report by UNESCO in 2021, titled The Chilling, which featured journalists from all around the world, said that the abuse journalists face is designed to belittle, humiliate, and shame women to scare us into silence and retreat. Scare us, silence us. As journalists, we represent the public. When they silence us, they silence you. Journalists of color are canaries in the proverbial coal mine, the first recipients of abuse whose concerns have long been ignored and dismissed. Around the time COVID hit came abuse, increasing abuse for white women. And now the targets have spilled over into advocacy groups, academia, educators, healthcare professionals, anyone on a social media platform. As journalists, many of us face a choice: retreat in your professional lives or in your personal one. I've chosen the latter, but I don't know how long that is sustainable. Because there is also a blurring of lines between the digital world and the real world. A few years ago, when I was alerted that my name and photo were being circulated in white supremacist forums, I had to clean up my social media, take down any photos of my children, make sure my residence could not be identified. I no longer shop in my own name. Among neighbors, I am perfectly adept at answering the question, "What do you do?" without actually saying anything. And why would I? A family down the street where I lived until recently had a gigantic queue for QAnon drawn with chalk on the road outside their house. And in the winter, a queue built with mounds of snow on their lawn. Did I really need them to know what I do and what I write? The stress often comes from not knowing who or what could become a threat and when. So I'm reclusive in my personal life. And yet, the kind of abuse that I'm describing right now is the tip of the iceberg. It's one that's easy to see, easy to understand instantly as bad. The more insidious harassment comes from bad actors. A politician who exhorts his followers to play dirty against the media. Or a fellow journalist who's offering criticism but tags troll factories abroad, or simply sits back and, as their followers, unleash hate on you. The UNESCO report that I referred to earlier on online violence calls this phenomenon, which is very common in Canada, dogpiling. It involves not just fringe networks, but publicly identifiable political actors and male journalists. That means friends, or friends of friends, could be unleashing venom. That brings it closer, doesn't it? It takes away from the comfort of our imaginings of the peddlers of hate as being strangers, losers sitting in their basements, or even in a sterile troll factory in Russia or in India. It's easier to repudiate online hate by rejecting its uncivility and its vulgarity, far more difficult to call our own to account. I once wrote about a Canadian radio host who was told, "If you like the illegals so much, you should go have your clit burnt off and your ass torn up through ritual gang rape before being sold off." It's horrifying, but it's not enough to be perpetually horrified. Often, trauma comes not just from the abuse, but also from the lack of support around it. There are pieces of accountability around industry support, government action, and social media accountability. But this is about all of us. What can we do? What can you all do? First, a couple of things not to do. Don't censor or tone police a journalist by saying, "If you write this, what do you expect?" Dissent, even rude dissent, is not a pass for abuse. Don't say, maybe avoid social media. For journalists, especially for freelance journalists, these platforms offer scope for assignments and livelihood. Don't say ignore it, or don't say it's a badge of honor because it means you've arrived. Don't say toughen up, buttercup. If you see, what you can do is if you see a provocative rights-based story in the media, especially covered by someone from a marginalized background, write to the head of the media organization and say, what are you doing to take care of the journalist who will be facing backlash today? CC the journalist. It makes them feel seen. I get these, and every one of them is worth dozens of hate mails that I receive. It tells the establishment that the public is watching and the public cares. And lastly, introspect continuously. Why do I think what I think? What assumption did I just make about that black person, that homeless person, that disabled person, that trans person? And how would I have responded if that same person was a white man in a suit? Doing this in the privacy of your head will clarify your own lens, help you recognize dog whistles, and eventually find the courage to stand up against all injustices. I am safe when you become safe. Thank you.
Simgiget, Sigidim ha nach, Gantkobo Wilksit, Luam Godi, Winge Asam, Atama Satun, Angela Sterritt, Lualgia Zum Kabist, Iwea, Walter Sterritt Yaa, Giksan, Lakyep. Hello, honored guests. I'm very happy to see you this evening. My name is Angela Sterritt. I'm Giksan on my father's side. I'm also white with English and Irish roots on my mother's side. On the day I received my Giksan name, Lualgia Zum Kabist, and I am a proud member of the House of Wigach, the House of the Big Wings. I also quit my job at CBC, ending a long career as a television and radio reporter. And I learned my Giksan name that was given to me by my elder, who's also my cousin, and my language teacher, was Lualgia Zum Kabist, which means woman who works in television and radio. So it's just a funny thing that I always will carry with me because I'm not going back to that hell. Thank you. There's a saying that goes, if you say something enough, it becomes the truth. Actually, it's not just a saying. It's a well-established phenomena in cognitive science known as the illusory truth effect. When it comes to Indigenous people, that illusion has had a strong hold on Canadians for decades. So today I want to talk about the power of story, the power of belief, the power of speaking up, and the supernatural power of change. Because we definitely need change, right? We're living in a very polarized time. We surely need stories about Indigenous people, Indigenous women and girls in general to shift. And we absolutely need to speak up. No more silence. As the colonial hangover of systemic anti-Indigenous female violence means that each day we leave the house, we might not make it home alive. Even though we make up only 4% of the female population in Canada, we made up 25% of all female homicide victims in this country. And stereotyping, those myths, that victim blame also often result in impunity for crimes against Indigenous women. So what does this mean? What does it tell us? This January, a CBC report found that of the 231 calls to justice put out by the National Inquiry looking into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, out of 231, only 2 were completed. Someone asked me, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, it sends a strong message out to the world, doesn't it? That we don't matter. But women are the backbone of Indigenous communities. We're the ones that hold the knowledge. We're the ones that carry the stories. We carry the strength. We carry the children. So how do we get to a place where we matter in Canada? For me, it's through the truth. We're not at reconciliation yet. We're not even close. I think of Ramona Wilson. She was 16 in 1994. She had a mother, a sister, and nephews, friends, a community that loved her. She was the responsible one in her friend group. She was a poet. She had a belief in a higher power. When she went missing, she was headed to a graduation ceremony, a privilege that all youth should be afforded. But because of a lack of an affordable transportation system that didn't come to fruition until 2018, she had to hitchhike. The police didn't believe the family that she was missing. Instead, they typecast them as irresponsible. The public also didn't care. Instead, the township fundraised for a white woman who was missing from a community thousands of kilometers away in Vancouver. Melanie Carpenter's killer was found 3 days later. Ramona Wilson's case is still unsolved. But what could have happened if her family was believed? If the city, if anyone spoke out? If the narratives about Indigenous women were not riddled with stereotypes? I could have easily been her. When I was a young girl, in photographs and testimony in court, my relatives stood in full regalia, fighting the white man's laws in the white man's courts, using the white man's words, in the largest Aboriginal rights and title case of the time, the Dalgamukh. I was so proud to see members of my nation, my elders, my uncles. They were strong, they were wise, they were brilliant, they were creative, they were fierce. I was so excited to turn on the TV and see my people represented. But when I turned on the TV, all I saw were untruths. These lazy, dirty Indians, what do they want now? They're violent, belligerent. And so I decided then it was my fight. It was my time to turn the narrative around using my voice. Only I was becoming a stereotype myself. At barely 13, I was being abused in the home. I was being brutally bullied at school. And not long after, I was forced on the street. Living under bridges, group homes, and abandoned buildings became my norm. So there I was, boiling over in rage, becoming the stereotype I fought so hard against. And no one believed me. No one wanted to hear about it. Just get over it, they said. No one cared. And so I decided then to take my own life. I was in a group home in East Vancouver. I was in the bathroom, I'd locked myself in, and I'd left a pretty long suicide note outside in the living room. And I heard the group home parent, Tom Littlewood, coming in, and he was shuffling through the papers. And I stopped him before he could say, "We love you, we care, don't do it." I said, "F off, get the hell out of here. Leave me alone, I'm doing this no matter what. There's nothing you could say to make me stop this. No one cares about me. No one wants to hear my truth. No one believes me." And he didn't say any of that. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't say, "We care, don't do it." Instead, he said, I've got your suicide note here and I've read it. And you're a really great writer. Someone believed in me. Not just believed in me, they believed me. They believed my pain. They believed when I talked about colonial violence. They believed in my journey and they believed in my gifts. There was light at the end of the tunnel. And that hope planted a seed in me to become a journalist in an arena where that pen would go from a counselor to an agent of change. Through my writing in television, online, in radio, I flipped the script about the narrative about Indigenous people in Canada and showed Canada the real, undiluted truth, facts about Indigenous women and girls, that we do have a right to live in safety. We do have a right to be honored in our lives just as much as we do in our deaths. We also deserve to love, to have peace, to have joy. And so my message to you today is that if I could find my voice with no friends, no family, hell, sometimes not even a sleeping bag, so can you too. See the truth, hear the truth, believe Indigenous people's stories, and use your voice to create the change that is so desperately needed today. Thank you.
Wow. One more time for our speakers. Woo! Thank you to Paulette Sr., Pamela Cross, Jake Stika, Anuradha Dugal, Slift. I always say it as separate names, but it's so good. Slift and Fluffy Soufflé, Shree, Paradkar, and Angela Sterritt. What incredible knowledge and wisdom. And I want to say we believe your stories. Thank you for sharing them. Now, to bring this evening to a close, please welcome to the stage Andrea Gunraj, Vice President, Public Engagement at the Canadian Women's Foundation.
Thanks, everyone. I want to thank you for taking time for joining us, lifting our heavy hearts, because you're passionate about safety and freedom from harm. Thank you to our esteemed speakers who joined us tonight. Thank you for inspiring us with your strong voices and wisdom, and just thank you for sharing your stories and difficult truths. I want to give some special appreciation to our generous and steadfast donors and partners who fuel the Canadian Women's Foundation to serve as Canada's public foundation for gender justice and equality. Special appreciation to Women and Gender Equality Canada who helped us tonight and enabled tremendous impact to end gender-based violence in Canada at this critical time. Thank you to the incredible Walrus team for your partnership on this event, and I want to thank you for your commitment to truth and integrity in journalism. Thank you to the Canadian Women's Foundation team, working so tirelessly to make this event happen. As we move into the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which launches on November the 25th and includes December 6th Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, I want to leave you with 3 urgent actions. And I'm mindful of you folks who are in the room and who are joining us online tonight. First of all, go to signalforhelp.ca. Sign up to become a Signal for Help responder. Get tools, tips, training, and learn how to respond to any sign or signal of abuse, and offer your non-judgmental support to an abuse survivor in your life. You are the caring friend, family member, and coworker who makes all the difference to somebody struggling today. Number 2, search 2 or 3 services in your community you can refer a survivor to. It could be a crisis line, like the Assaulted Women's Helpline. It could be sheltersafe.ca, which lists all the women's shelters in Canada. Visit CanadianWomen.org, you'll find a list of services there. Number 3, give of your time, your treasure, your talent to challenge gender-based violence today, where you live, work, worship, and play. Be a voice for safety and support. There are lots of ways to do this, big and small. It all matters, and you do what makes sense for you. In the end, I encourage you to do something. This all too common violence thrives in silence, shame, stigma, and stereotypes. The good news is that we can all play our part to listen, support, and get vocal for the safe communities and workplaces we all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for those very clear actions we can all take. Now, I'm going to invite our talkers to stand up, and they're going to get a head start as they make their way out to the reception so they can catch their breath and grab a drink. While they do that, I'm going to tell you all more about what we have coming up. We have, yeah, another round of applause. I know you want to. On Tuesday, November 21st, we'll be gathering online for the Walrus Talks at Home, the Health and Climate Crisis. This is supported by the Canadian Medical Association. It's about the dangers that the climate crisis poses to our health here in Canada, around the world. We heard earlier discussions on everything from polycrises, including wildfires, to I think the health effects that we're seeing firsthand day in and day out. Sign up for our newsletter. You can do so by opting in the follow-up email. Also, for those of you here with us in Toronto, we have a table just outside. At that table, you can also subscribe to the Walrus. We have a special offer for those of you in the room. A full year subscription to the Walrus, that's 8 issues delivered right to your door for just $25. So stop by the Walrus table and the team will set you up. We also have copies of Angela's best-selling book, Unbroken, at the Walrus merchandise table. And I asked Angela, and she said she'd be happy to autograph those. Now, we have a limited supply, so if you're interested, on your way out, go straight to the table. For 20 years now, the Walrus has been home to Canada's most important stories. These are the stories that have shaped who we are as a country. And we're able to continue this work thanks to our community of support. But with the rise of AI, misinformation, disinformation, it's getting harder to distinguish fact from fiction. But for the record, we also publish fiction at the Walrus. But it's clearly marked, don't worry. Right now, your support is especially vital in preserving the true art of storytelling. So consider making a donation. You can visit thewalrus.ca/fall donate. We're in the middle of a fall fundraising campaign right now. You can also make a direction at that table. We are a registered charity, so all gifts $20 or more do receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks again to the Canadian Women's Foundation for making these talks possible, but for just doing such important work. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Inspire, and Rogers. And thanks to all of you. I heard you laughing, I heard you gasping, and I heard you listening hard. And we really appreciate that engagement. And thanks for being part of the Walrus community. We look forward to continuing this conversation and work together. Have a great evening.